The clinking of crystal glasses and muted conversations filled the upscale Manhattan steakhouse as Sarah Mitchell shifted uncomfortably in her chair. At 6 months pregnant, every position felt wrong. But tonight the discomfort came from more than her growing belly. She clutched the legal documents she had found hidden in her husband's briefcase, her hands trembling slightly as she watched Richard cut his steak with surgical precision. "Keep your voice down. Sarah, people are staring," Richard Mitchell said without looking up from his plate. Even his whisper carried the commanding tone that had made him one of New York's most successful corporate attorneys and CEO of Mitchell Industries. Sarah glanced around the restaurant where they had celebrated their 5th wedding anniversary just last year. The same crystal chandeliers cast the same warm light over couples sharing intimate dinners. But tonight everything felt different. Tonight, she held proof that her marriage was a lie. "These are divorce papers." "Richard," she said, her southern accent becoming more pronounced as it always did when she was upset. Growing up in Fairfield, Alabama, she had learned to speak softly, but tonight she was struggling to keep her voice steady. "I found them in your briefcase, along with the private investigator's report about me." Richard finally looked up, his gray eyes cold as winter steel. "Those papers are precautionary, nothing more. Standard legal protection for high net worth individuals. You're being dramatic." "Dramatic," Sarah felt her cheek flush. "There's a custody evaluation report in here. Richard, you've been having me followed for months, and I know about Jennifer." At the mention of his assistant's name, Richard's jaw tightened. He set down his knife and fork with deliberate care, the way he did everything calculated for maximum impact. "Jennifer is a professional colleague. If you're implying something inappropriate, you're mistaken." But Sarah had seen the credit card statements, the hotel charges, the unexplained business trips. 6 years of marriage had taught her to read the signs her millionaire ex-husband would soon become had been hiding from her. "I'm not stupid, Richard. I may have been naive when we met, but I'm not blind." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I want to know why you married me. I want to know why you got me pregnant, and I want to know what this means." She slid a particular page across the table, one that had made her stomach turn when she read it. It detailed her background, her family history, information that seemed oddly focused on her mother's maiden name and her childhood in Alabama. Richard's face went white as he scanned the document. For a moment, his corporate mask slipped entirely. "Where did you get this? From your briefcase, along with everything else?" Sarah felt a strange calm settling over her, the same feeling she used to get before standardized tests when she was still teaching elementary school. "I want the truth, Richard, all of it." The silence stretched between them like a wire about to snap. Around them, other diners continued their conversations, oblivious to the drama unfolding at table 12. A waiter approached with water, but Richard waved him away with sharp irritation. "The truth," Richard's voice had gone dangerously quiet. "The truth is that you're an ungrateful woman who doesn't understand how good she has it. The truth is that without me, you'd still be teaching 3rd grade in some nowhere town, living paycheck to paycheck. At least I'd be living honestly." "Honestly," Richard laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want to talk about honesty? You've been lying to yourself for 6 years, pretending this marriage was some fairy tale romance. You were a project, Sarah. An investment that's about to pay dividends." The words hit her like physical blows. Sarah felt the baby kick inside her, as if responding to her elevated heart rate. "What does that mean?" "It means that naive little school teacher act might work on everyone else, but I know exactly what you're worth, and it's not your charming Southern manners." Sarah stared at him, seeing clearly for the first time the man she had married. Not the successful attorney who had swept her off her feet at a charity fundraiser, but someone calculating in cold. Someone who spoke about her like she was a business transaction. "You're talking about money?" she said slowly. "This is about money. Everything is about money. Sarah, something you've never had to worry about because I've provided for you. But that's going to change." "Are you threatening me?" Richard leaned back in his chair, his corporate smile returning. "I'm explaining reality. You sign those papers, take the settlement I'm offering, and you walk away with enough money to raise our child comfortably. You fight me, and you'll discover just how expensive divorce can be. especially when there are questions about mental stability, pregnancy hormones, emotional outbursts, paranoid accusations about affairs. Very concerning behaviors for someone expecting to raise a child alone. Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. This wasn't just about divorce. This was about custody, about control, about ensuring she could never escape or expose whatever game he had been playing. You can't do this. I can do whatever I need to do to protect my interests. And right now, my interests include making sure our child grows up understanding proper family values. The threat hung in the air between them. Sarah looked down at the documents again, her mind racing. There had to be something she was missing. Some piece of the puzzle that would explain why Richard had gone to such lengths to investigate her background. Why he seemed to know things about her family that she had never told him. The private investigator report, she said suddenly. It mentions my mother's maiden name. Why would you need to know that? Richard's confidence flickered for just a moment. Standard background verification. For a marriage, Richard, we dated for 2 years before we got married. You met my stepfather. You knew my history. Why would you need to investigate my mother's family? You're overthinking this. My mother died when I was 17. Her family wasn't part of my life. Why would you care about the Blackstone name? At the mention of Blackstone, Richard went completely still. Sarah watched his face, seeing fear replace calculation for the first time in their marriage. Richard, what is the Blackstone name to you? Instead of answering, he reached across the table and grabbed her wrist, his grip tight enough to bruise. Listen to me very carefully. Sarah, there are things about your family that you don't understand, things that are better left buried. If you know what's good for you and our baby, you'll sign those papers and disappear quietly. Sarah tried to pull her wrist free, but his grip tightened. You're hurting me. I'm trying to protect you from making a mistake you can't undo. By forcing me to sign divorce papers, by threatening to take my baby, by keeping you away from people who will destroy you. The conversation was spiraling into territory Sarah didn't understand. She looked around the restaurant, hoping to catch someone's attention, but Richard's body blocked her from view of most other diners. Let go of me, Richard. Not until you promise me you'll stop digging into things that don't concern you. My family concerns me. Your family is me and our baby. Nothing else matters. Sarah felt a surge of anger unlike anything she had ever experienced. All the years of subtle criticism, of being made to feel small and grateful, of having her opinions dismissed as emotional or naive, crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity. My family is not you, she said, her voice carrying across the restaurant. And I'm not your property. The slap came so fast she didn't see it coming. The crack echoed through the dining room like a gunshot, and suddenly every conversation stopped. Sarah's cheek burned, and she tasted blood where her teeth had cut her lip. The silence stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Then the whispers started, and Sarah realized that her life had just changed forever in the most public way possible. Ma'am, are you all right? Sarah looked up to see a waiter standing beside their table, his face pale with concern. He was tall, probably in his late 30s, with dark hair and green eyes that seemed oddly familiar. His voice carried a warmth that made her want to cry. I'm fine, she managed, though she was clearly not fine. The waiter looked at Richard with barely concealed disgust. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. This is a private matter, Richard snapped, but his voice lacked its usual authority. Not anymore, it isn't. The waiter's tone was calm but unmistakably firm. Security is already on the way. You can leave on your own, or they can escort you out. Richard looked around the restaurant, finally realizing that every eye was on him. His corporate image, so carefully cultivated over decades, was crumbling in real time. This isn't over, Sarah, he said as he stood up. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into. He threw his napkin on the table and stalked toward the exit, leaving Sarah alone with the curious stares of 50 strangers and a waiter whose presence felt strangely comforting. Can I get you some ice for your cheek? The waiter asked gently. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. As he walked away, she noticed something about his stride, something confident yet careful, like someone who had learned to move through the world with purpose but without attracting unwanted attention. When he returned with a cloth-wrapped ice pack, He sat down in Richard's abandoned chair without asking permission. "I know this is presumptuous," he said, "but you shouldn't be alone right now. And you definitely shouldn't drive." "I'll call a cab," Sarah said, accepting the ice pack gratefully. "What's your name?" "Sarah Mitchell." She paused. "Well, Sarah Wheeler Mitchell, I suppose. I'm not sure what my name is anymore." Something flickered across the waiter's face at the mention of Wheeler. "Wheeler," he repeated slowly. "From Alabama." Sarah looked at him sharply. "How did you know that? Your accent, and—" He hesitated, studying her face in a way that made her uncomfortable. "This might sound strange, but did you ever live in Fairfield?" Now Sarah was truly unsettled. "Who are you?" Instead of answering directly, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. Sarah stared at it, her world tilting sideways. "Blackstone Holdings. Marcus Blackstone, Chief Executive Officer." The name hit her like a physical blow. Blackstone, the same name that had been in Richard's investigation report, the same name that had made him go white with fear. "I don't understand," Sarah whispered. Marcus Blackstone looked at her with those familiar green eyes, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle but certain. "I think you do, Sarah. I think you've always known something was missing. I think you've spent your whole life feeling like a piece of you was somewhere else." Sarah stared at this man who claimed to be a billionaire CEO, but had been serving her dinner, who knew her hometown and her maiden name, who looked at her like he had been searching for her his entire life. "Who are you?" she asked again. "I'm your brother," Marcus said simply. "And I've been looking for you for 25 years. 3 hours later, Sarah sat in her empty penthouse apartment, staring at the business card that had turned her world upside down. The ice pack had long since melted, leaving her cheek tender but the bruise fading. What wasn't fading was the impossible claim from a man who said he was her brother. Marcus Blackstone. The name echoed in her mind like a half-remembered song. She had searched it online as soon as she got home, and the results had made her sink into Richard's imported leather chair with disbelief. Forbes listed Marcus Blackstone as the 38th richest person in America, worth $4.2 billion. The tech empire he had built from nothing included software companies, real estate holdings, and venture capital investments that spanned 3 continents. The photos showed a man with her green eyes and their mother's determined jawline, standing in boardrooms and giving speeches about innovation and economic opportunity. But what struck her most was something in his expression in every photo, something guarded yet hopeful, like someone who had achieved everything but was still searching for something specific. Her laptop sat open to a 2019 interview where he discussed growing up in foster care in Alabama after his mother disappeared when he was 13. He spoke carefully about overcoming abandonment, about channeling the pain of loss into business success, about the importance of family even when family wasn't traditional. "I learned early that the people who are supposed to love you can leave without warning," he had said in the interview. "But I also learned that love isn't about blood relations. It's about choosing to show up for people, even when it's difficult." Sarah remembered being 17 when her mother died. Car accident, her stepfather Tom had said. Tragic, sudden, nothing anyone could have done. They had moved from Alabama to New York 6 months later, and Tom had legally changed her name from Sarah Blackstone Wheeler to Sarah Wheeler, saying it would help her start fresh without painful reminders. Now she wondered if there had been other reasons. The apartment felt different tonight, like a stage set where she had been playing a role without knowing it. Everything Richard had chosen, from the minimalist furniture to the abstract art that meant nothing to her, suddenly felt like a costume she was ready to shed. Her phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "We need to talk. This doesn't have to be difficult." She deleted it without responding. Then she called the number on Marcus Blackstone's business card. He answered on the first ring, as if he had been waiting. "Sarah, I need to ask you something," she said without preamble. "Do you remember a little girl who used to read under an oak tree behind the blue house on Maple Street?" The silence stretched for several seconds. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion. "You had a book about a princess who saved herself. You read it so many times the cover fell off." Sarah closed her eyes, remembering. She had been maybe 7 or 8, and there had been an older boy who sometimes brought her lemonade and sat quietly nearby while she read. Her mother had called him her guardian angel. but Sarah had been too young to understand the significance. "That was you," she said. "That was me. I was 15, working after school at the grocery store, but I always made sure to check on you on my way home. Mom said you were too little to understand why I couldn't live with you and Dad. But you're my brother." "Half-brother," Marcus corrected gently. "Same mother, different fathers. Mine was complicated, violent. Mom got us both out when I was little, but your father could provide stability for you that she couldn't give me." Sarah felt tears starting. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" "Because Mom made everyone promise to protect you from the truth. She was terrified that my father would find us and hurt you to get to her. When she died, your stepfather honored that promise. Even from you, especially from me. Tom Wheeler is a good man. Sarah, he moved you across the country and changed your name because he was genuinely afraid for your safety. My father was in and out of prison throughout my teens. The last thing Mom wanted was for you to grow up in that shadow." Sarah thought about her stepfather, who had always been kind but distant, who had remarried quickly and built a new family that somehow never quite included her completely. She had always attributed the distance to grief, but now she wondered if it had been guilt. "Where is your father now?" "Our father," Marcus corrected. "He's serving life without parole for murder. Has been for 8 years." The words hit Sarah like ice water. Murder. "He killed a man who threatened me. Ironic, considering he was the biggest threat in my life for years. But that's a conversation for another time." Marcus paused. "The important thing is that he can't hurt you now. Can't hurt either of us." Sarah struggled to process this information. Her half-brother was a billionaire whose father was a convicted murderer, and she had found out about both facts in the same night her husband had slapped her in public and threatened to take her baby. "This is insane," she said aloud. "Which part? All of it. This morning I was married to a successful attorney and thought my biggest problem was postpartum depression. Tonight I discover my husband is planning to divorce me for reasons connected to a family I didn't know I had. And my brother is apparently one of the richest men in America. Life has a way of revealing truths all at once," Marcus said. "The question is what you want to do with those truths." Sarah looked around the apartment that had never felt like home, thinking about the divorce papers and the threats and the way Richard's grip had left finger-shaped bruises on her wrist. "I want to understand what's happening to me. That's going to require some difficult conversations. More difficult than learning my entire life has been built on protective lies." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You'd be surprised. Can you meet me tomorrow? My office, say 10 a.m. What if Richard finds out? Sarah, I've been building this company for 15 years. If I can't protect one pregnant woman from one narcissistic attorney, I'm not the businessman people think I am." Something in his tone made her believe him. For the first time in months, Sarah felt like someone was on her side unconditionally. "Okay," she said, "but I have conditions." "Name them." "I want the complete truth. About Mom, about your father, about why Richard is so afraid of the Blackstone name, about everything. No more protective lies." "Agreed. And I want to understand what this means for my baby. I won't let my child become a pawn in whatever game Richard is playing." "Sarah," Marcus said, his voice gentle but certain, "I give you my word that your child will grow up safe and loved and free from the mistakes our parents made. Whatever else happens, family protects family." After they hung up, Sarah sat in the dark apartment and thought about the woman she had been that morning compared to the woman she was becoming tonight. The transformation felt like shedding a skin that had never quite fit right. She made herself tea and opened her laptop again, this time searching for information about the connection between Mitchell Industries and Blackstone Holdings. What she found made her stomach turn. Legal disputes going back 3 years, patent challenges, regulatory complaints filed against Blackstone companies by law firms including Mitchell, Holbrook and Associates, a pattern of systematic attacks that seemed designed not to win, but to drain resources and create negative publicity. Richard hadn't just known about Marcus. He had been waging a quiet war against him for years. Sarah thought about all the times Richard had worked late, all the business trips and closed-door phone calls. She had assumed he was building their future, but instead he had been methodically destroying her brother's present. The baby kicked again, and Sarah placed her hand on her belly. "Don't worry, little one," she whispered. "Your Uncle Marcus is going to help us figure this out." For the first time in months, that felt like a promise instead of a hope. The next morning brought rain and the kind of gray sky that made Manhattan look like an old black and white movie. Sarah stood outside the Blackstone building on Fifth Avenue, craning her neck to see the top floors lost in low-hanging clouds. 91 stories of glass and steel that represented everything she had never imagined being part of her life. The lobby felt like a cathedral, all marble and soaring space designed to make visitors feel small. But when Sarah approached the security desk and gave her name, the guard's attitude shifted immediately from professional courtesy to genuine warmth. "Ms. Mitchell, Mr. Blackstone asked me to escort you personally. Right this way." The elevator ride to the 91st floor felt endless, but Sarah was grateful for the time to gather her thoughts. She had spent most of the night reading everything she could find about Marcus Blackstone, and the picture that emerged was of a man who had built an empire through ruthless intelligence and unwavering determination. But she had also found something else in the interviews and profiles, a thread of loneliness that ran through even his greatest successes. He spoke often about creating opportunities for other people and about the importance of second chances, about believing that anyone could overcome their circumstances with enough support and determination. Reading between the lines, Sarah suspected that Marcus had spent 15 years trying to save other people because he couldn't save himself from the pain of losing his family. The elevator doors opened to reveal a reception area that looked more like a living room than a corporate office. Comfortable seating, warm lighting, and walls lined with books instead of corporate awards. A woman in her 50s rose from behind a desk that looked more like an antique writing table. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm Helen. Mr. Blackstone's assistant. He's waiting for you." Marcus's office took up the entire corner of the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of Central Park that made Sarah catch her breath. But what struck her most was how the space felt lived in rather than designed. Personal photos, comfortable furniture, a reading corner with a worn leather chair that looked like someone actually used it. Marcus stood with his back to the door, looking out at the park. When he turned, Sarah was struck again by how familiar his face was, how much he looked like their mother around the eyes. "Thank you for coming," he said simply. "Thank you for telling me the truth, or at least part of it." Marcus gestured to a seating area away from his desk, two chairs positioned to take advantage of the view. Between them sat a folder that Sarah suspected contained the rest of her story. "Coffee, water, Helen makes incredible tea if you prefer." "Actually, I'd like to start with this," Sarah said, pulling out a photograph she had found in her jewelry box that morning. It showed a young woman with dark hair and green eyes, holding a toddler while a slightly older boy stood beside them. "This is the only picture I have of our mother with both of us." Marcus took the photo with hands that weren't quite steady. "I remember this day. Mom had just bought you that dress with the pink flowers. You insisted on wearing it everywhere for a month. I don't remember the dress, but I remember feeling safe, like we were a real family. We were a real family, for a little while." Sarah settled into her chair, placing her hands on her belly as the baby shifted restlessly. "Tell me what happened. All of it." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing the edge of the photograph. "Our father, Victor Blackstone, was what people politely call troubled, alcoholic, violent, unable to hold a job for more than a few months at a time. Mom tried to make it work because she believed marriage was forever. But by the time I was 10, she was planning our escape. Both of us. That was the plan. She had been saving money, making contacts in other states, researching how to disappear completely. But Victor found out." Sarah felt her chest tighten. "What did he do? He beat me badly enough to put me in the hospital for a week. Told Mom that if she tried to leave with us, he would kill all three of us rather than let her take his children away." Children. You have to understand. Victor saw ownership where other people saw family. We weren't his children to love. We were his property to control. The idea of Mom taking us away drove him into rages that terrified everyone who saw them. Sarah thought about Richard's coldness, his casual threats about custody and mental stability. Different methods, perhaps, but the same fundamental view of women and children as possessions. "So Mom chose to save one of us rather than lose both," she said quietly. "She made the hardest decision any parent can make. She took you and ran, leaving me with promises that she would come back for me as soon as it was safe. But it was never safe. Marcus shook his head. Victor spent 2 years looking for you, hired private investigators, put up reward money, even got some of his criminal friends involved. Mom lived in constant terror that he would find you and carry out his threats. What changed? I did. Marcus's voice went flat. When I turned 13, I was big enough and angry enough to fight back. Victor came home drunk one night and started in on me. But this time I hit him back. Put him in the hospital with a broken jaw and 3 cracked ribs. Sarah stared at him. You were 13 years old. Old enough to be tired of being afraid. After that night, Victor left me alone. But he also became more focused on finding you and Mom. Said he needed to teach her that taking his property had consequences. Did he find you? Not Mom. She was too smart, too careful. But he tracked down your stepfather's information somehow. Tom Wheeler called Mom in a panic, said someone had been asking questions about you at your school. Sarah felt cold creeping up her spine. What did Mom do? She made another impossible choice. She called Tom and told him to take you and disappear. Change your name. Move across the country. Cut all ties with anyone who knew about your connection to Alabama. She told him that if Victor found you, he would use you to hurt her, and then he would kill all of you to cover his tracks. And Tom agreed. Tom loved you. Really loved you. Not the possessive way Victor understood love. He took you to New York, legally adopted you, gave you his name, and built you a life where Victor Blackstone could never reach you. Sarah felt tears starting. What about you and Mom? We agreed that the safest thing was for me to go into foster care. Mom would stay hidden until Victor gave up looking for you, and then we would figure out how to rebuild our family. But that never happened. Victor was arrested for assault 6 months later, and then again for robbery. He was in and out of prison for the next 4 years, always making threats about what he would do when he got out, always making it clear that finding you was his top priority. Sarah realized she was holding her breath. And then Mom died in that car accident when you were 17. Sudden, tragic. Nothing anyone could have done. The way Marcus said it made Sarah look at him sharply. You don't believe it was an accident? I think Mom was exhausted from 5 years of hiding, 5 years of looking over her shoulder, 5 years of being separated from both her children. I think she was driving too fast in bad weather because she was rushing to meet someone who claimed to have information about Victor's latest prison release. Someone set her up. I've never been able to prove it, but I've also never been able to shake the feeling that Mom's accident was too convenient, too well-timed, too perfectly tragic. Sarah felt sick. You think your father had her killed? Our father, Marcus corrected again. And yes, I think it's possible. Victor has never admitted to it, but he's also never seemed surprised that she died right when she was starting to plan a reunion with us. The baby kicked hard enough to make Sarah gasp, and Marcus was immediately alert. Are you okay? Just processing the idea that my mother might have been murdered by a man who spent years hunting me like an animal. Marcus reached across and took her hand. Sarah, I need you to understand something. Victor can't hurt you now. He's serving life without parole. He has no outside contacts. And even if he did, he doesn't know where you are or who you've become. You're safe. But Richard knows who I am. Richard knows about the Blackstone name, and he's been using that information somehow. Which brings us to the question that's been keeping me awake for 3 years, Marcus said. How does your husband know things about our family that took me a decade and considerable resources to uncover? Sarah thought about the private investigator's report, about Richard's reaction to the Blackstone name, about his threats and his confidence that he could control her future. I think, she said slowly, that my marriage was never about love. I think it was always about access to something, but I don't understand what. Marcus opened the folder between them and pulled out a document that made Sarah's heart sink. Blackstone Holdings has a unique corporate structure, he said. When I built the company, I included provisions that would allow any direct blood relative to claim a significant stake if certain conditions were met. What kind of conditions? Marriage, children, proof of genetic relationship? It was meant to protect any family I might have someday, to ensure that Blackstone money could never be used to separate families the way poverty separated ours. Sarah stared at the document, understanding beginning to dawn like a horrible sunrise. Richard married me because he thought he could get access to your money through our child. I think Richard married you because someone told him that marrying a Blackstone heir would eventually pay off in ways he couldn't imagine. The question is who gave him that information and why? Sarah thought about her comfortable life with Richard, about how he had always been generous with money but controlling about everything else, about how he had insisted on handling all their financial planning and legal affairs. He's been playing a long game, she said. Years and years of investment in a relationship that he thought would eventually make him rich. Very rich. If you had claimed your inheritance and then divorced him, community property laws would have given him access to hundreds of millions of dollars. The scope of the deception hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had spent 6 years loving a man who had seen her as nothing more than a pathway to wealth that she hadn't even known existed. But if he divorced me first, she said slowly, before I knew about my connection to you, he could claim that you concealed assets during the marriage, could argue for a larger settlement based on fraud. Very clever. Actually, Sarah felt a surge of anger that surprised her with its intensity. He was going to steal my inheritance and my child and make me grateful for whatever scraps he left me. That appears to have been the plan. Until you found those papers and connected the dots? What happens now? Marcus smiled, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked genuinely dangerous. Now we figure out who's been feeding Richard information about our family. And then we make sure that anyone who tries to use a Blackstone for their own gain learns why that's a very bad idea. Sarah looked at her brother, seeing not just the successful businessman, but the 13-year-old boy who had been willing to fight back against impossible odds. I want to help, she said. Sarah, you're 6 months pregnant and going through a divorce. You need to focus on taking care of yourself and your baby. This is my life they've been manipulating. This is my child they're planning to use as a bargaining chip. I'm not sitting on the sidelines while other people decide my future. Marcus studied her face, and Sarah saw the moment he recognized something familiar in her expression. You have mom's eyes, he said quietly. But you have her backbone too. Okay, we do this together. But we do it smart, and we do it safe. What's the first step? The first step is moving you somewhere Richard can't find you while we figure out his next move. I have a place that's secure, comfortable, and completely private. I can't just disappear. I have doctor's appointments, responsibilities, all of which can be handled with better security and a lot more backup than you've had so far. Marcus leaned forward. Sarah, I've spent 25 years wondering what happened to my sister. I'm not losing you again because we underestimated what desperate people are willing to do. Sarah thought about Richard's threats, about his confidence that he could control her future, about the cold calculation in his eyes when he had slapped her. Okay, she said, but I want to understand everything. No more protective lies. No more decisions made for my own good. I want to know what we're dealing with and how we're going to handle it. Agreed. But first, I want you to meet someone who's been helping me search for you all these years. Someone who has some theories about how Richard got his information. A private investigator who specializes in corporate espionage and family reunification. Her name is Detective Maria Santos, and she thinks your husband's connection to our family goes back much further than either of us realized. As if summoned by her name, the office door opened and a woman in her 40s entered, carrying a thick file and wearing the kind of expression that suggested she had news no one was going to like. Ms. Mitchell, she said, we need to talk. Detective Maria Santos had the kind of presence that made people confess things they had never planned to tell anyone. Compact and efficient, with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that missed nothing. She settled into the third chair in Marcus's office and opened her file with the care of someone handling evidence. Before we start, she said to Sarah, I need you to understand that what I'm about to tell you is going to change how you see everyone in your life. Are you sure you're ready for that? Sarah looked between Maria and Marcus, noting the tension in her brother's shoulders. I don't think I have a choice anymore. There's always a choice. You could walk away right now, take Marcus's offer of financial security, and build a quiet life somewhere far from all of this. Lots of people would consider that the smart move. Would you? Maria smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I've never been accused of being smart, but I have been accused of being thorough. She pulled out a photograph and placed it on the table. Do you recognize this man? Sarah looked at the picture and felt her world tilt sideways again. That's my stepfather, Tom Wheeler. Taken 3 weeks ago outside Richard's office building. The implications hit Sarah like ice water. Tom has been talking to Richard. More than talking, according to my sources, Tom Wheeler has been providing Richard with detailed information about your family background for over 2 years. Sarah stared at the photograph, trying to reconcile the man who had raised her with the betrayal it represented. That's impossible. Tom protected me from all of this. He moved us to New York, changed my name, built me a new life. He did, Maria agreed. And he's been terrified ever since that he made the wrong choice. Marcus leaned forward. What do you mean Tom Wheeler has been carrying guilt about your mother's death for 25 years? He blames himself for not doing more to protect her, for not finding a way to keep your family together, for taking Sarah so far away that Maria died alone. Sarah felt tears starting. He never said anything. What could he say that he'd been second-guessing himself for decades, that he wondered if Maria would still be alive if he'd made different choices? Maria pulled out another document. 2 years ago, someone approached Tom with an interesting proposition. Richard, Sarah said. Actually, no. Someone claiming to represent Richard's interests, but working for a third party. They told Tom that they had located Marcus Blackstone and were working on a family reunion. They said they needed background information about Maria and Sarah to facilitate the process safely. Marcus's expression darkened. And Tom believed them. Tom wanted to believe them. He'd been watching Marcus's success for years, following his business career, hoping someday there would be a way to reconnect you with your sister without endangering anyone. When these people approached him with what seemed like a legitimate reunification effort, he saw it as a chance to finally do the right thing. Sarah felt sick. So he told them everything. Everything he knew. Your new name, your location, your marriage, your husband's career. He thought he was helping to heal your family. Instead, he was giving Richard ammunition to destroy it, Marcus said grimly. It gets worse, Maria continued, because once Tom started talking, these people kept coming back with more questions. About your mother's last days, about Victor Blackstone's threats, about the specific circumstances of Maria's death. Why would they care about that? Maria exchanged a look with Marcus. Because Victor Blackstone didn't stop being dangerous when he went to prison. He's been running a small but efficient criminal organization from inside, and his sons from his first marriage have been very interested in making sure no one challenges their claim to be his only heirs. Sarah felt the baby kick as her heart rate spiked. His sons. Victor had 2 sons before he met your mother. Professional criminals who've been waiting 25 years for him to die, so they can inherit whatever assets he managed to hide before his conviction. What assets? That's the million-dollar question. Literally, Maria pulled out another document. Victor Blackstone may have been a violent drunk, but he was also smart enough to hide significant money in accounts that no one has been able to locate. Money from years of organized crime activities that the FBI never recovered. Marcus was very still. How much money? Conservative estimates suggest somewhere between $10 and $50 million. Enough to make people very motivated to eliminate any potential competition for inheritance rights. Sarah realized she was having trouble breathing. Competition like me. Competition like you and any children you might have. Under Alabama inheritance law, Victor's biological children have equal claims to his estate, regardless of legitimacy or family relationships. So Richard wasn't just after Marcus's money. He was trying to position our baby to claim Victor's hidden assets too. Richard was playing multiple angles, Maria confirmed. Marry into the Blackstone family, gain access to Marcus's legitimate wealth, and eventually claim a share of Victor's criminal assets through his child's bloodline. Sarah looked at Marcus, seeing her own horror reflected in his expression. How many people are we dealing with? At minimum, Victor's 2 sons, whoever they're working with on the outside, Richard and his co-conspirators, and potentially some very unpleasant people who've been waiting decades to get paid back from Victor's hidden accounts. The scope of it was overwhelming. Sarah had thought she was dealing with one narcissistic husband and his extramarital affairs. Instead, she was caught in the middle of a multi-generational criminal conspiracy involving millions of dollars and people who had already demonstrated their willingness to kill. What about Tom? She asked quietly. Tom is genuinely remorseful and absolutely terrified, Maria said. Once he realized what he'd gotten you into, he tried to back out, but by then it was too late. They have enough information to destroy his life if he doesn't continue cooperating. We have to help him. We will, Marcus said firmly. But first we have to keep you safe. Because if Victor's sons realize that Richard's plan is falling apart, they're going to start looking for more direct solutions. More direct than what? Maria and Marcus exchanged another look, and Sarah realized there was something else they hadn't told her. Maria, Marcus said quietly, show her the timeline. Maria reluctantly pulled out a final document. These are the dates of significant events in your family's story, cross-referenced with some interesting coincidences. Sarah scanned the timeline, her confusion growing. I don't understand what I'm looking at. Your mother's car accident happened 2 days after Victor's latest appeal was denied, Maria explained. Richard met you exactly 6 months after Marcus's company went public, making his wealth a matter of public record. Your stepfather was first approached by Richard's people within a week of Victor's sons being released from their latest prison sentences. You think this has all been planned for years? I think this has all been planned since the day your mother died, Marcus said grimly. I think Victor's sons have been watching our family for decades, waiting for the right moment to claim what they think belongs to them. And Richard just happened to be in the right place at the right time to help them. Or Richard has been working for them all along, Maria said. We're still trying to determine which scenario is more likely. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the complexity of the deception. So everyone in my life has been lying to me. My husband, my stepfather, maybe even people I haven't identified yet. Not everyone, Marcus said gently. Tom loved you and was trying to protect you, even when he made mistakes. And you have family now who will do whatever it takes to keep you safe. What does that mean? Practically speaking, Maria leaned forward. It means you disappear until we can neutralize the threats against you. New identity, secure location, 24-hour protection until your baby is born, and we've dealt with everyone who thinks they have a claim on your family. How long could that take? Months, maybe longer. Sarah thought about spending the rest of her pregnancy hidden away while other people fought battles in her name. The idea was both appealing and frustrating. What if I don't want to disappear? What if I want to fight back? Then you put yourself and your baby at risk, Marcus said bluntly. These people have already killed at least one person. Sarah, they won't hesitate to kill more if it serves their purposes. You really think they killed Mom? I think your mother's accident was awfully convenient for people who needed her to stop interfering with their long-term plans. Sarah placed her hands on her belly, feeling the baby's steady movements. For the first time, she understood that this wasn't just about her anymore. Whatever choices she made would affect an innocent child who deserved to grow up safe and free from the violence that had shaped both her and Marcus's childhood. Okay, she said finally, I'll disappear, but I want regular updates, and I want to say in how this gets resolved. I'm not spending the rest of my life looking over my shoulder because we were too scared to deal with the problem permanently. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe it's time the Blackstone family stopped running from Victor's legacy and started fighting back. Marcus smiled, and Sarah saw something fierce and determined in his expression. Now you're talking like a Blackstone, he said. The safe house Marcus had arranged turned out to be a sprawling estate in the Hamptons, complete with a private beach, state-of-the-art security, and a staff that seemed to anticipate Sarah's every need before she knew she had them. It should have felt like paradise, but after 3 weeks of luxury and isolation, Sarah was ready to climb the walls. You're pacing again, Doctor, Elizabeth Hartman observed from her chair by the fireplace. The obstetrician Marcus had hired made house calls twice a week, partly for Sarah's medical care, and partly because she was one of the few people cleared for access to the property. I'm pregnant, not an invalid, Sarah replied, continuing her circuit around the living room. And I'm going crazy with all this sitting around while other people handle my life. Your brother is trying to protect you. My brother is trying to control a situation that's been out of control for 25 years. There's a difference. Doctor, Hartman closed her medical chart and studied Sarah with the kind of attention that made her feel like a specimen under a microscope. Tell me about the nightmares. Sarah paused mid-pace. She had been having the same dream for weeks now. variations on a theme that always ended with her mother driving through a storm, calling Sarah's name as her car skidded toward an inevitable collision. They're just stress dreams, anxiety about the situation. Trauma responses can manifest in many ways, especially during pregnancy. The hormonal changes, combined with the emotional upheaval you've experienced, create a perfect storm for psychological processing. You think I'm having a breakdown? I think you're having a completely normal response to discovering that your entire life has been built on lies and deception. The question is whether you're going to let that trauma define your future, or whether you're going to take control of your own narrative. Sarah sank into the chair across from Dr. Hartman, finally admitting how exhausted she felt. I don't know how to take control when I don't understand what I'm fighting. Then maybe it's time to stop fighting other people's battles and start fighting for what you want. What do you mean? You're here because your brother wants to protect you from people who want to use you. But what do you want, Sarah? If you could write the ending to this story yourself, what would it look like? Sarah thought about the question that had been haunting her for weeks. What did she want for months? She had been reacting to other people's decisions, other people's revelations, other people's plans for her future. I want my child to grow up free, she said finally. Free from the violence that shaped my family. Free from people who see children as assets to be leveraged. Free from the kind of fear that made my mother choose exile over fighting back. That's a good start. What else? I want the truth. All of it. About my mother's death. About Victor Blackstone's assets. About who's been manipulating my life and why. I'm tired of living in a story where I don't know the plot. And personally, what do you want for Sarah? Separate from being a mother or a sister or a victim? The question caught Sarah off guard. She realized she had spent so many years being defined by her relationships to other people that she had forgotten to consider what she wanted for herself. I want to matter, she said quietly. I spent 6 years married to a man who saw me as a means to an end. I want to be valued for who I am, not what I can provide or what I represent. Do you think that's possible with your current life situation? Sarah looked around the beautiful prison Marcus had created for her, thinking about the bodyguards outside and the surveillance system monitoring every entrance to the property. Not if I stay hidden forever. Not if I let other people make all the decisions about my safety and my future? Dr. Hartman nodded. What would taking control look like? Practically speaking, I don't know. I don't have the resources or the knowledge to fight people like Victor's sons on my own. But you have a brother who does have those resources. The question is whether you want to be a partner in that fight or a bystander to it. Before Sarah could answer, her phone buzzed with a call from Marcus. She had been expecting his daily check-in, but his voice sounded strained in a way that immediately put her on alert. Sarah, we need to talk. Can Dr. Hartman stay for this conversation? Of course. What's wrong? Maria got some new information about Richard's activities. We know why he's been so confident about controlling your divorce settlement. Sarah put the call on speaker so Dr. Hartman could hear. Tell me, Richard has been building a case to have you declared mentally incompetent. He's been documenting what he calls emotional instability, paranoid behavior, and delusional thinking. He's planning to argue that your pregnancy, combined with the stress of learning about your family connection to me, has triggered a psychological break that makes you unfit to make decisions about your own life or your child's future. The words hit Sarah like physical blows. He can't do that. He can if he has enough evidence. And according to Maria's sources, he's been very methodical about creating that evidence. Dr. Hartman leaned forward. What kind of evidence? Medical records showing Sarah's anxiety and depression during pregnancy. Documentation of her accusations about his affair, which he's characterizing as paranoid jealousy. Witness statements about her emotional outbursts, including the restaurant incident. Sarah felt sick. He's going to use my reaction to being slapped as proof that I'm unstable. It gets worse. He's also planning to argue that your connection to me represents a dangerous influence, given my family history of violence and criminal activity. He wants to paint your relationship with me as evidence of poor judgment that could endanger your child. This is insane. This is very clever, Dr. Hartman said grimly. Pregnancy-related mental health issues are real and well documented. If Richard can convince a judge that Sarah is experiencing postpartum psychosis or severe depression, He could potentially gain full custody and control over all financial decisions. Sarah realized she was shaking. How long do we have? Richard filed preliminary paperwork yesterday. You have 30 days to respond before he can request an emergency custody hearing. Can we fight it? We can, but it's going to require you to be visible and active in your own defense. No more hiding. No more letting other people handle your legal affairs. You'll need to demonstrate competency, stability, and good judgment in front of multiple professionals and possibly a judge. Sarah thought about the safe house, about the luxury and isolation that had felt like protection, but might now look like avoidance of responsibility. Marcus, I need to come back to the city. Absolutely not. It's not safe. It's not safe for me to look like I'm hiding from my problems either. If Richard is building a case that I'm mentally unstable, then disappearing for weeks and avoiding all my normal responsibilities is exactly the kind of behavior that supports his argument. Dr. Hartman nodded. Sarah's right. Extended isolation, especially during pregnancy, can actually contribute to mental health issues. If she's going to fight this competency challenge, she needs to demonstrate that she's engaged with her life and making rational decisions. The threats against her are real, Marcus insisted. Then we deal with the threats while I'm living my life, not by putting my life on hold indefinitely. Sarah could hear Marcus's frustration through the phone. Sarah, you don't understand how dangerous these people are. And you don't understand how dangerous it is for a woman to let other people make all her decisions for her, even people who love her. The line was quiet for several moments. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was thoughtful rather than argumentative. What are you proposing? I'm proposing that we stop playing defense and start playing offense. Richard thinks he can use my family history against me. But what if we use it for me instead? How? What if we take control of the narrative? What if instead of hiding from the Blackstone legacy, we embrace it and use it to expose everyone who's been trying to exploit it? Dr. Hartman looked intrigued. Go on. Marcus, you've spent 15 years building a business empire based on the idea that anyone can overcome their circumstances. I've spent my whole life not knowing I had circumstances to overcome. What if we tell that story publicly? You want to go public with all of this. I want to take away Richard's ability to control the narrative about my mental state and my judgment. Instead of letting him paint me as an unstable woman who can't handle the truth about her family, what if I tell the story of a woman who discovered she had a brother and chose to fight for her family instead of running from it? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. That's incredibly risky. Sarah, once this story is public, there's no taking it back. Once Richard files his competency case, there's no taking it back anyway. At least this way, I get to tell my own story instead of having it told for me. What about the threats? What about Victor's sons and the people who've been manipulating your life? What about them? They've been operating in shadows for 25 years, counting on secrecy and fear to give them power. What happens to that power when everything is public? When the FBI and the media and the entire world are watching to see what happens to the Blackstone family? Dr. Hartman smiled. That's not the reasoning of an unstable woman. That's the reasoning of someone who understands exactly what she's up against and has chosen to fight back strategically. Marcus, I need to come home. I need to be part of this fight, not a bystander to it. And I need to do it in a way that demonstrates competency and good judgment, not fear and avoidance. The line was quiet for so long that Sarah wondered if the call had dropped. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice carried a note she had never heard before Pride. Okay, sister, let's go to war. Sarah's return to Manhattan felt like stepping into a different world, one where her name had acquired weight and meaning she was still learning to understand. The penthouse apartment she had shared with Richard had been transformed by a team of security experts into what Marcus cheerfully called a fortress with good lighting, complete with reinforced doors, surveillance systems, and panic rooms disguised as walk-in closets. This feels excessive, Sarah said, watching two men in expensive suits test the response time on her new security alarms. This feels necessary, Marcus replied, reviewing a tablet full of monitoring data. Maria's intelligence suggests that Victor's sons are getting impatient with Richard's slow burn approach. They're pushing for more direct action. Meaning what? Meaning they think it might be easier to eliminate the competition than to outmaneuver it legally. Sarah placed her hand on her belly. feeling the baby's reassuring movements. At 7.5 months pregnant, she felt like she was carrying a basketball under her ribcage. But Dr. Hartman insisted that both she and the baby were thriving despite the stress. Have you heard from Richard? Every day. He's been calling, texting, having flowers delivered, playing the part of the concerned husband whose pregnant wife is being influenced by dangerous people. And his legal case, Marcus's expression darkened, stronger than we'd like. He's got statements from your former colleagues questioning your judgment, medical records documenting anxiety and mood changes, even testimony from neighbors who've noticed changes in your behavior. What kind of changes? Isolation, paranoia, abandoning your normal routines? All easily explained by learning that your husband was planning to divorce you and steal your inheritance. But Richard's team is framing it as evidence of psychological instability triggered by pregnancy hormones and family trauma. Sarah felt frustrated by how reasonable Richard's argument sounded. What do we have to counter with Maria's been building a case about Richard's deception and financial manipulation? We can prove he's been planning this divorce for years, that he married you under false pretenses, that he's been systematically undermining your mental health to build his legal case. Will that be enough? Honestly, I don't know. Family court judges see a lot of messy divorces with competing claims about mental fitness. Unless we can prove that Richard's behavior rises to the level of criminal fraud, it becomes a he said, she said situation where your pregnancy and family history work against you. Sarah looked around the apartment that no longer felt like home, thinking about the public narrative strategy she had proposed at the safe house. What if we don't wait for family court? What if we take this public first? I've been thinking about that. There are risks. Everything has risks. What are the benefits? Marcus pulled up a chair, settling in for what she recognized as one of his strategic planning sessions. The benefits are significant. If we control the timing and framing of this story, we can potentially neutralize several threats at once. How a first? We take away Richard's ability to claim you're having a psychological break by demonstrating that you're lucid, articulate, and making rational decisions about your family and your future. Sarah nodded. What else? Second, we force Victor's sons out of the shadows. Right now, they're operating through intermediaries and proxies, which gives them deniability. If the FBI starts investigating their connection to this situation publicly, they either have to retreat or escalate in ways that expose them to prosecution. And third, we potentially protect other people who might be targeted in the future. If this story becomes public, it becomes much harder for people to use similar tactics against other victims. Sarah felt something crystallizing in her mind, a sense of purpose that had been building for weeks. I want to do it, but I want to do it right. What does that mean? I want to tell the complete story, not just about Richard's manipulation or Victor's criminal legacy, but about the cost of family secrets and the importance of women taking control of their own narratives. Marcus looked intrigued. Go on. How many women are trapped in marriages with narcissistic abusers because they don't have the resources or support to fight back? How many families are destroyed by secrets that are kept to protect people, but end up isolating them instead? You want to make this bigger than just our situation? I want to make this meaningful beyond just our situation. If I'm going to put my life and my baby's future on the line, I want it to matter for more than just winning a custody battle. Before Marcus could respond, Sarah's phone rang with a call from an unknown number. She almost declined it, but something made her answer. Hello, Sarah. It's Tom. Her stepfather's voice sounded older and more fragile than she remembered. Sarah felt a complex mix of love, anger, and sadness hearing from the man who had raised her, but also betrayed her trust. Tom, where are you? Somewhere safe. I hope. I need to see you. Sarah, there are things I need to tell you, things I should have said years ago. Sarah looked at Marcus, who was already signaling their security team. What kind of things? Things about your mother's last days? Things about why I really moved you to New York? Things about the people who've been asking questions about you? Tom, are you in danger? We all are, sweetheart. More than you know. Can you meet me? Sarah felt torn between her love for the man who had been her father for 25 years and her awareness that he might be compromised or being used by their enemies. Tom, I need you to know that I forgive you for talking to Richard's people. I understand why you did it. The silence on the line stretched long enough that Sarah wondered if he was crying. You always were too generous, Sarah, too willing to see the best in people. That's what made you such a wonderful teacher. But it's also what made you vulnerable to people like Richard. What do you mean? People like Richard? I mean people who study their targets, who learn exactly what buttons to push and what vulnerabilities to exploit. Sarah, Richard didn't meet you by accident at that charity fundraiser. He was hunting you. Sarah felt cold spreading through her chest. Hunting me how? He'd been tracking you for months before you met, learning your schedule, your interests, your emotional weak points, the charity work, the elementary school teaching, your tendency to help people even when it cost you. How do you know this? Because the people who approached me about providing information about your family showed me photos. Sarah, photos of you going to work, going to the grocery store, going to your book club. They'd been watching you for a long time before Richard ever introduced himself. Sarah realized she was shaking. The fairy tale romance she had believed in, the charming attorney who had swept her off her feet with his attention and generosity, had been an elaborate stalking operation. Tom, where are you? We need to get you somewhere safe and debrief everything you know. I'm not sure anywhere is safe anymore. They know I've been talking to you and Marcus. They know I'm not going to cooperate anymore. Who is they, exactly? People who think Victor Blackstone's money belongs to them. People who've been waiting 25 years to collect on debts that your father owed before he went to prison? Sarah felt the baby kick hard, responding to her elevated stress levels. Tom, listen to me carefully. I want you to go to the nearest police station and ask for protective custody. Tell them you have information about organized crime and that your life is in danger. Sarah, do it now, Tom. Please, I can't lose you too. The line went dead, leaving Sarah staring at her phone with a terrible sense of foreboding. Marcus was already on his phone with Maria, coordinating efforts to locate Tom and assess his safety. But Sarah was thinking about something else, something that crystallized her resolve about going public with their story. Marcus, she said when he finished his call, how quickly can we arrange a press conference? Why? Because I don't want to spend the rest of my life hiding from people who think they own me, and I don't want my child to grow up in a world where victims are expected to stay quiet while predators operate openly. Marcus studied her face, seeing something there that made him nod slowly. How soon can you be ready? I've been ready my whole life. I just didn't know it yet. The press conference was scheduled for Thursday morning at the Blackstone Holdings headquarters, but by Wednesday evening, Sarah was second-guessing everything. She stood in Marcus's office, looking out at the city lights and wondering if she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life or finally take control of her own narrative. The media response has been significant, Helen reported, reading from a list of RSVPs. CNN, NBC, ABC, The New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and about 20 other outlets. This is going to be a major story. Any word from Richard? Sarah asked. His lawyer called 3 times today, Marcus replied. Very polite request that you reconsider any public statements that might prejudice ongoing legal proceedings. Translation, he's panicking. Translation, he knows that once you tell your story publicly, his narrative about your mental state becomes much harder to sell. Maria Santos entered the office carrying a thick folder and wearing an expression that made everyone look up immediately. We have a problem, she announced without preamble. Sarah felt her stomach drop. What kind of problem? The kind that suggests tomorrow's press conference just became much more dangerous than we anticipated. Maria opened her folder and spread several photographs across Marcus's desk. These were taken this morning outside various Blackstone Holdings properties. Sarah stared at the images, seeing unfamiliar men in dark cars positioned where they could observe everyone coming and going from Marcus's buildings. Surveillance, Marcus said grimly. More than surveillance. 3 of these men have criminal records connected to Victor Blackstone's organization. They're not here to watch. They're here to send a message. What kind of message? The kind that says your family has attracted attention from people who don't like publicity. Sarah felt the baby kick as her anxiety spiked. Are we talking about immediate physical danger? We're talking about people who've spent decades operating in shadows and are now facing the possibility of national media attention on their activities. That makes them unpredictable. Marcus was already on his phone, speaking in low, urgent tones to his security team. Sarah watched him transform from her protective older brother into the billionaire executive who had built an empire through strategic thinking and calculated risks. Options, he said when he finished his call. We postponed the press conference, Maria said immediately. Move Sarah back to the safe house. Wait for law enforcement to assess and neutralize the threats. Which could take weeks or months, Sarah protested. Meanwhile, Richard proceeds with his competency case and potentially gains custody of my baby. Better than you getting hurt or killed. Is it better for my child to grow up with a father who manipulated and abused their mother, who married her under false pretenses and planned to steal her inheritance? Is it better for them to never know their uncle or their real family history? Maria and Marcus exchanged a look that told Sarah they had already discussed this scenario. There's another option, Marcus said carefully, which is, we move the press conference to a more secure location and use it to force everyone's hand at once. Meaning we don't just tell your story about Richard's manipulation. We tell the complete story about Victor's criminal organization, about the threats against our family, about the systematic intimidation of anyone who might challenge their control over his hidden assets. Sarah felt something click into place. We make it impossible for them to operate in shadows anymore. Exactly, we put everything on the record, with federal law enforcement present, in a way that makes any retaliation against us a federal crime with dozens of witnesses. Maria looked skeptical. That's incredibly risky. You're essentially declaring war on people who've already demonstrated their willingness to kill. They declared war on us 25 years ago, Marcus replied. We're just finally fighting back. Sarah thought about her mother, dying alone in a car accident that might not have been an accident. She thought about Tom, somewhere in hiding because he had tried to help her. She thought about the baby growing inside her, who deserved to inherit a legacy of strength rather than fear. I want to do it, she said firmly, but I want guarantees about law enforcement presence and witness protection for Tom and anyone else who's been caught up in this. Already arranged, Marcus said. Maria has been coordinating with FBI agents who've been investigating Victor's organization for years. They're very interested in finally having cooperative witnesses. What about Richard? Richard becomes a footnote in a much bigger story. Instead of this being about a messy divorce with competing claims about mental fitness, it becomes about a woman who discovered her family was being targeted by organized crime and chose to fight back publicly. Sarah felt a strange calm settling over her, the same feeling she had experienced in her classroom when facing particularly challenging students. Sometimes the only way through a difficult situation was to meet it head-on with truth and determination. When do we start preparing my statement? We've already started, Marcus said, pulling out a legal pad covered with notes. But the final version needs to be in your voice, telling your story the way you want it told. Sarah spent the next 4 hours working with Marcus and Maria to craft a statement that balanced legal precision with emotional truth. She wanted to expose the systematic manipulation she had experienced without sounding like a victim, to acknowledge the dangers her family faced without appearing unstable or paranoid. The key, Maria explained, is to sound like someone taking control of their narrative, not someone whose narrative is out of control. What if I am someone whose narrative is out of control? Then you fake it until you make it, because the alternative is letting other people control your narrative forever. Sarah thought about the woman she had been 6 months ago, compliant and grateful and willing to let Richard make all the important decisions. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone she had been playing rather than someone she actually was. I've been thinking about something, she said to Marcus as they worked on the final draft, about why Victor's sons waited so long to make their move. What do you mean? They could have tried to claim his assets years ago, or they could have gone after you directly when your company went public. Why wait until now to target me? Marcus looked thoughtful. What's your theory? I think they needed to be sure Victor was never getting out of prison. As long as there was a possibility he might be released, they couldn't risk openly challenging his authority or claiming his money. But something changed. His latest appeal was denied 6 months ago, finally and permanently. For the first time in 25 years, they know for certain that Victor is going to die in prison. Maria nodded slowly. Which means for the first time, They can start planning to inherit his empire without worrying about his reaction, but only if they eliminate any other potential heirs first. You and any children you might have. Sarah placed her hand on her belly, feeling the baby's steady heartbeat under her palm, which means this was always going to come to a head eventually. Richard just gave them a convenient method for gaining control. So stopping Richard doesn't stop the larger threat. No, but exposing the larger threat neutralizes Richard and potentially protects other people who might be targeted in the future. Marcus smiled, and Sarah saw something fierce and proud in his expression. You know what I realized tonight? What? You've stopped thinking like someone who's being hunted and started thinking like someone who's hunting back. Sarah considered that assessment, recognizing its truth. Somewhere in the process of uncovering the layers of deception that had shaped her life, she had transformed from prey into predator. Is that good or bad? It's survival, and it's exactly the kind of thinking that's going to keep you and your baby safe. Sarah looked out at the city again, thinking about all the people going about their lives, unaware that tomorrow she was going to tell a story that would change everything for everyone involved. Marcus, what if this doesn't work? What if going public just makes us bigger targets? Then we deal with whatever comes next, but we deal with it as a family, and we deal with it in the light instead of hiding in shadows. Promise me something. Anything. Promise me that no matter what happens tomorrow, we don't let fear make our decisions anymore. We don't let other people's violence control our choices. Marcus took her hand, his grip warm and steady. I promise. But you have to promise me something too. What? Promise me that if this gets too dangerous, if the threats escalate beyond what we can handle, you'll let me get you and the baby somewhere safe while we finish this fight. Sarah looked at her brother, seeing in his face the same protective instinct that had led their mother to make impossible choices 25 years ago. I promise I'll always prioritize my baby's safety, but I won't promise to hide while other people fight my battles for me. Those days are over. Marcus nodded, accepting the compromise. Then let's go make some history. Thursday morning dawned gray and cold, with the kind of persistent drizzle that made Manhattan look like a noir film. Sarah stood in the bathroom of Marcus's office, looking at herself in the mirror and wondering if the woman staring back at her was brave enough for what she was about to do. At 8 months pregnant, she felt like she was carrying the weight of the world along with her baby. But there was something different in her reflection today. Something steady and determined that hadn't been there 6 months ago when Richard had slapped her in that restaurant. The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the Blackstone Holdings main conference room, which had been transformed into a media center complete with cameras, microphones, and enough security to make the Secret Service proud. Sarah could hear the murmur of voices through the walls as reporters and law enforcement officials took their positions. You don't have to do this, Marcus said for the 10th time that morning. We can still call it off. Find another way to handle Richard's legal challenge. And spend the rest of my life wondering if I was brave enough to fight for my family when it mattered most? Sarah shook her head. No, I'm done letting other people make decisions about my future. Maria Santos appeared in the doorway, carrying a tablet and wearing the kind of expression that suggested she had news that would complicate everything. We just got word from the FBI, she said without preamble. Victor's sons made contact this morning. They want to negotiate. Sarah felt her heart rate spike. Negotiate what? They're offering to leave you alone permanently in exchange for a public statement that you renounce any claim to Victor Blackstone's assets and agree never to pursue information about your mother's death. Absolutely not, Marcus said immediately. It's not his decision, Sarah replied, looking at Maria. What exactly are they offering? Complete withdrawal from any surveillance or intimidation activities? No interference with your divorce proceedings or custody arrangements, and a guarantee that your child will never be contacted or threatened by anyone connected to Victor's organization. In exchange for giving up my right to know how my mother died and any potential inheritance from a man I've never met. Essentially, yes. Sarah thought about the offer, recognizing both its appeal and its fundamental flaw. What happens if I take their deal and then someday decide I want to know the truth anyway? Then the deal is off and we're back to the current situation. So they want me to promise to never seek answers about my own family and to bind my unborn child to that same promise. That's how I read it. Sarah felt a surge of anger that surprised her with its intensity. They want me to choose ignorance and fear. the same way my mother did. They want me to pass that legacy of secrets and silence on to my child. Marcus stepped closer. Sarah, you need to consider this carefully. This offer represents safety for you and your baby. This offer represents exactly the kind of thinking that got our family into this mess in the first place. How many generations of Blackstones are going to sacrifice truth for the illusion of safety? Maria looked between Sarah and Marcus, clearly seeing the tension building between them. There's something else, she said carefully. The FBI thinks this offer indicates that Victor's sons are more worried about public exposure than we realized. They wouldn't be negotiating if they thought they could handle the consequences of this story going public. Meaning we have more leverage than we thought. The threats against you are real, but so is their fear of federal investigation. Sarah made her decision with the same clarity that had been guiding her for weeks. I'm not taking their deal. I'm not trading my right to the truth for their promise to stop terrorizing my family. And I'm not teaching my child that the way to handle bullies is to give them whatever they want. Sarah, Marcus started. No. I've listened to everyone's advice. I've considered all the risks, and I've made my choice. We're doing this press conference, and we're telling the complete truth about everything. Before anyone could argue further, there was a knock on the door. Helen appeared, looking slightly flustered. Ms. Mitchell, there's someone here to see you. He says he's your stepfather. Sarah's heart leaped. Tom, is he safe? He's with FBI escorts, but he's asking to speak with you privately before the press conference begins. Sarah looked at Marcus, who nodded reluctantly. 5 minutes, then we need to start. Tom Wheeler looked older than Sarah remembered, with new lines around his eyes and a fragility that spoke to the stress he had been under. But when he saw her, his face lit up with the same gentle smile that had comforted her through childhood nightmares and teenage heartbreaks. Sarah, sweetheart, you look beautiful. She hugged him carefully, mindful of her belly between them. Tom, I was so worried. Are you okay? I'm safe now, thanks to your brother's security team. But I needed to see you before you do this thing. Needed to tell you some things that might change how you want to handle the situation. What kind of things? Tom pulled out a manila envelope, thick with documents and photographs. Things I should have told you years ago, but I was too scared and too ashamed to share. Sarah opened the envelope and found herself looking at photographs of her mother she had never seen before. Maria Blackstone as a young woman, laughing and confident, standing next to a man Sarah didn't recognize. Who is this? That's your mother with Detective James Morrison, the police officer who was investigating Victor's criminal activities when she met him. He was the one who helped her plan your escape from Alabama. Sarah stared at the photograph, seeing something in her mother's expression that she had never seen in the few pictures she had from her childhood. Mom looks happy. She was happy. For the first time in years, she had hoped that Victor could be stopped legally, that she could get both her children to safety without having to sacrifice one to save the other. What happened? Detective Morrison was killed in what was officially ruled a robbery gone wrong. Shot 3 times outside his apartment. Wallet missing. Case closed. But Maria never believed it was random. Sarah felt cold spreading through her chest. She thought Victor had him killed. She was certain of it, and she was terrified that anyone else who tried to help her would end up the same way. Tom pulled out another document, this one bearing official letterhead from the Alabama State Police. This is Detective Morrison's final report on Victor's organization. He was planning to present it to a federal grand jury the week he died. Sarah scanned the document, seeing references to money laundering, drug trafficking, and a network of criminal associates that extended far beyond anything she had imagined. Tom, why are you showing me this now? Because Detective Morrison had a partner who's been carrying on his investigation unofficially for 25 years. Agent Patricia Collins, now a senior FBI investigator specializing in organized crime. She's here. She's downstairs with the other federal agents. Sarah, she's been waiting 25 years for someone from your family to come forward and help her finish what Detective Morrison started. Sarah realized she was trembling. You're saying that telling my story today isn't just about protecting myself from Richard or Victor's sons. It's about finally getting justice for Detective Morrison and potentially dozens of other victims. I'm saying that your mother would be proud of the woman you've become. And I'm saying that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is also the most necessary thing you can do. Sarah looked at the photographs again, seeing her mother not as a victim who had died alone and afraid, but as a woman who had been trying to fight back against impossible odds. Tom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Anything. Do you think Mom's car accident was really an accident? Tom was quiet for a long moment, his face heavy with 25 years of carried guilt. No, sweetheart. I don't think it was an accident. I think your mother was murdered because she refused to stop fighting for her children. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, but instead of devastating her, they crystallized her resolve into something unbreakable. Then it's time to finish what she started. Sarah stood up, placed her hand on her belly, and looked at Tom with the kind of determination that reminded him powerfully of the woman who had raised her. Let's go tell the world what happens when you underestimate a Blackstone woman. The Blackstone Holdings conference room had been transformed into something resembling a court hearing, with cameras focused on a simple podium and rows of chairs filled with reporters, federal agents, and law enforcement officials. Sarah stood behind the podium, looking out at faces that would carry her story to millions of people, and felt a strange calm settle over her. "Good morning," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "My name is Sarah Wheeler Mitchell, and 6 months ago, I thought I knew who I was. I thought I was a former elementary school teacher, married to a successful attorney, living a comfortable life and expecting my first child. Today, I'm here to tell you what I've learned about the difference between the life you think you're living and the life that's actually being lived around you." She paused, letting her words settle before continuing. "I'm here to talk about systematic deception, financial manipulation, and the way that women are often treated as assets to be acquired rather than people to be respected. I'm here to talk about family secrets that were meant to protect but ended up isolating, and about the courage it takes to choose truth over safety." Sarah looked directly into the main camera, thinking about all the women watching who might recognize pieces of their own stories in hers. "But mostly, I'm here to talk about what happens when you stop letting other people tell your story for you and start telling it yourself." She spent the next 30 minutes laying out the complete narrative: Richard's systematic manipulation, the discovery of her connection to Marcus, the threats from Victor's criminal organization, and the web of deception that had shaped her entire adult life. "I want to be clear about something," she said as she neared the end of her prepared statement. "I'm not here asking for sympathy or pity. I'm here as a woman who discovered that the people she trusted most had been lying to her for years, and who chose to fight back rather than accept that deception as the price of security." The question and answer session that followed was intense but manageable. Sarah found that telling her truth publicly was actually easier than she had expected. There was something liberating about no longer having to manage other people's versions of her story. But the real impact of the press conference became clear in the days that followed. Within 48 hours, Richard's law firm had fired him and launched an internal investigation into his conduct. The competency case against Sarah was quietly withdrawn, and Richard's attorney filed papers requesting an uncontested divorce with minimal financial claims. "He's trying to minimize his exposure," Maria explained as they reviewed the legal documents. "He knows that his manipulation tactics are now on public record, and he can't afford to have them examined more closely in family court." "What about the threats from Victor's sons?" "Radio silence. Agent Collins thinks they've decided that the attention on their activities makes it too risky to continue targeting you." Sarah felt a complex mix of relief and anticlimax. "So it's over? The immediate threats are neutralized, but there's more." Marcus entered the room carrying a folder thick with legal documents. "The FBI's investigation into Victor's organization has uncovered enough evidence to bring federal charges against 12 people, including Victor's sons. Agent Collins thinks they'll be able to close cases that have been open for decades, including Detective Morrison's murder. Potentially, they found financial records that show payments to the man who killed him, payments that can be traced back to Victor's accounts." Sarah felt tears starting. Mom was right. She was murdered for trying to protect us. She was murdered for refusing to let violent men control her family's future, Marcus corrected gently. "And because she fought back, we now have the evidence to make sure the people responsible face justice." "What about Victor himself?" "He dies in prison either way, but now his legacy will be federal convictions for his organization, rather than criminal mythology about his hidden assets. Sarah thought about the woman in those photographs Tom had shown her, the mother who had died trying to protect her children from a violence she couldn't escape. "I want to do something," she said suddenly. "What? I want to start a foundation, something that helps women escape manipulative relationships and provides legal support for people trying to uncover family secrets that affect their safety." Marcus smiled. "How much money are you thinking?" "However much it takes. I want to use my inheritance from Victor's confiscated assets, if there are any, and whatever settlement I get from Richard's financial manipulation. I want to turn this whole nightmare into something that helps other people." "What would you call it?" Sarah thought about her mother's courage, about Detective Morrison's dedication, about all the women whose stories might never be told publicly, but who deserve support in their private battles. The Maria Morrison Foundation, after both of them, for truth and justice and the idea that no one should have to choose between safety and honesty. 6 weeks later, Sarah gave birth to a daughter she named Maria Rose Mitchell Blackstone, honoring both her mother and the new family she had claimed. Marcus was in the delivery room, crying harder than the baby, transformed by the experience of watching new life enter a world that finally felt safe. "She's perfect," he whispered, holding his niece with the careful awe of someone who had never expected to be an uncle. "She's a Blackstone," Sarah replied, exhausted but triumphant. "She's going to change the world." The foundation's first meeting took place in the Blackstone Holdings conference room where Sarah had told her story to the world. 30 women attended, all survivors of various forms of domestic manipulation, all working to rebuild their lives with truth instead of secrets. "I used to think that family was something that happened to you," Sarah told the group as little Maria slept peacefully in her carrier. "But I've learned that real family is something you choose, something you build, something you fight for. And sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born into." The women in the room nodded, recognizing their own journeys in her words. "We're here because we refuse to let other people's definitions of love and family limit our understanding of what's possible. We're here because we chose truth over comfort, justice over security, and our own voices over other people's narratives." Sarah looked around the room at faces that reflected every kind of courage: women who had left abusive marriages, mothers who had fought for their children, sisters who had chosen each other over birth families that couldn't accept their choices. "The most important thing I've learned," she continued, "is that healing happens in community. We don't recover from trauma and isolation, and we don't build new lives by pretending the past didn't happen. We heal by telling our stories, by supporting each other's journeys, and by refusing to let anyone convince us that we deserve less than complete honesty in our relationships." After the meeting, Sarah stood in Marcus's office, looking out at the city that had become home in ways she was still discovering. Little Maria was growing quickly, already showing signs of the Blackstone green eyes and her mother's determined chin. "Any regrets?" Marcus asked, joining her at the window. "About which part?" "About going public, about taking the risks, about choosing truth over safety." Sarah thought about the question seriously, considering everything that had changed since that night in the restaurant when Richard had slapped her and Marcus had revealed himself as her brother. "I regret that it took me 37 years to understand that I had choices," she said finally. "I regret that Mom died thinking she had to protect us by staying separated. I regret that there are women out there right now living the life I was living 6 months ago, thinking they have to accept manipulation and control as the price of security. But you don't regret the fight itself." "No, the fight was the first honest thing that happened to me in years." Marcus nodded. "What's next?" Sarah looked down at her sleeping daughter, thinking about the world she wanted Maria to inherit. "Next, we keep fighting. We keep telling the truth. We keep supporting women who are finding their voices, and we keep building the kind of family that Mom dreamed of, but didn't live to see." "Sounds like a plan. Sounds like a legacy." Sarah placed her hand on the window, looking out at the city full of people living their own complicated stories, fighting their own battles for truth and safety and love. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged. 1 year later, Sarah stood in the same Manhattan restaurant where her life had changed forever. But this time she was there for the Maria Morrison Foundation's first annual fundraising dinner. The private dining room was filled with supporters, survivors, and advocates who had helped build something meaningful from the wreckage of her former life. It feels different being here, Marcus observed, joining her near the window where they could watch the early spring rain painting the city in soft gray tones. Everything feels different, Sarah replied, adjusting 10-month-old Maria on her hip. The baby was alert and curious, reaching for everything within her grasp, with a kind of fearless determination that reminded Sarah powerfully of her mother. But good different, honest different. The evening's program was simple but powerful testimonials from women whose lives had been changed by the Foundation's legal support and counseling services, updates on the federal cases that had resulted from Sarah's testimony, and a presentation about expanded services planned for the coming year. But for Sarah, the most meaningful moment came when Agent Patricia Collins approached her during the cocktail hour. "Miss Mitchell, I wanted to thank you personally," the FBI investigator said, her voice carrying the weight of 25 years of patient investigation. "Because of your courage in coming forward, we were finally able to close Detective Morrison's case. His family has been waiting decades for answers. Was it really Victor who ordered his murder? We'll never be able to prove it directly, since Victor refuses to cooperate with any investigations. But we have enough evidence to convict the people who carried out his orders, and we've traced financial transfers that connect the murder to Victor's organization." Sarah felt tears starting. Mom was right to be afraid. Your mother was a brave woman who was trying to protect her children from a level of violence that most people can't imagine, but she was also fighting that battle alone, without resources or support systems. Unlike me, unlike you, the difference between your story and your mother's story is that you had a brother who could provide security and resources, and you lived in a time when women's voices are more likely to be believed and supported. Sarah thought about all the ways her story could have ended differently, all the points where fear might have won over courage if circumstances had been slightly different. "Do you think we've really stopped them, Victor's sons and their organization? We've disrupted their operations significantly. 3 of Victor's sons are now serving federal sentences, and the remaining members of his organization have either been arrested or have fled to countries without extradition treaties." But Agent Collins smiled grimly. "But organized crime is like a hydra. Cut off one head and 2 more appear somewhere else. The important thing is that we've sent a clear message that targeting families for financial gain will result in federal prosecution." Sarah nodded, understanding that the victory was significant but not permanent. "What about Richard? Richard is serving 18 months in minimum security for financial fraud. He'll lose his law license and most of his assets, but he'll survive. The question is what kind of man he'll be when he gets out." "That's not my problem anymore." "No, it's not. And that might be the most important victory of all." As the evening progressed, Sarah found herself in conversations with women whose stories shared common threads with hers. Systematic manipulation disguised as love, financial control presented as protection, isolation framed as special treatment. "The thing that strikes me," said Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a psychologist who specialized in treating survivors of narcissistic abuse, "is how many of these relationships follow the same pattern. The initial love bombing, the gradual erosion of self-trust, the systematic isolation from support systems. It's like they're all reading from the same playbook," agreed Jennifer Chen, a lawyer who handled domestic relations cases. "They are," Sarah said, thinking about Richard's methodical approach to undermining her confidence and independence. "The tactics work because they exploit universal human needs for love, security, and belonging. The only defense is education and support systems, which is why what you're doing matters so much." Dr. Martinez said, "Every woman who hears your story recognizes something from her own experience, even if her situation wasn't as extreme." Sarah looked around the room at the faces of women who had found the courage to rebuild their lives after discovering that their relationships were built on deception and control. "I've been thinking about something," she said to the group, "about the difference between healing and justice." "What do you mean?" "I used to think that getting justice for what happened to me would automatically lead to healing, but I've learned that they're separate processes that support each other but don't depend on each other." "How so?" "Justice happened when Richard was prosecuted and Victor's organization was dismantled. But healing happened when I started telling my own story, when I stopped letting other people define my worth, when I chose to build something positive from a terrible experience." Dr. Martinez nodded thoughtfully. "Healing is an internal process that you control. Justice is an external process that depends on systems and other people's choices." Exactly. And I think a lot of survivors get stuck waiting for justice before they start healing, which gives their abusers continued power over their recovery. Sarah looked across the room to where Marcus was talking with potential donors, still protective but no longer hovering, having learned to trust her judgment about her own safety and choices. The other thing I've learned is that family isn't just about blood relations or legal bonds. It's about people who show up consistently, who support your growth instead of trying to control it, who celebrate your successes without trying to take credit for them. As the evening wound down, Sarah found herself standing in the exact spot where Richard had slapped her 13 months earlier. The memory was still clear, but it no longer carried the emotional charge it once had. Thinking about that night, Marcus asked, appearing beside her with a sleeping Maria in his arms, thinking about how different everything is now. That night, I felt powerless and confused and trapped. Tonight, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Any advice for your former self? Sarah considered the question seriously. I would tell her that the slap wasn't the worst thing that happened that night. The worst thing was all the years before the slap, when she accepted being treated as less than equal and convinced herself it was normal. And the best thing was that the slap finally made her angry enough to stop accepting unacceptable treatment. Marcus smiled. Mom would be proud. I think so too. But more importantly, I'm proud. I'm proud that we chose truth over convenience, that we fought back instead of hiding, that we built something meaningful instead of just surviving. Sarah took her sleeping daughter from Marcus's arms, marveling at how much love and hope could be contained in one small person. What do you want for her? Marcus asked, nodding toward Maria. I want her to grow up knowing her own worth. I want her to understand that love should make her feel stronger, not smaller. I want her to know that she has choices, always, even when the choices are difficult. And if someday she faces the kind of manipulation you faced, then I want her to remember that her mother chose courage over comfort, that her uncle stood with her when it mattered, and that her family's legacy is fighting back against people who try to use love as a weapon. Sarah looked around the restaurant one final time, seeing not the scene of her humiliation, but the birthplace of her transformation. I want her to know that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the doorway to the best thing that happens to you. And I want her to know that she comes from a long line of women who refused to be broken by the people who underestimated them. As they prepared to leave, Sarah noticed that their waiter for the evening was the same young man who had served them the night everything changed. He approached their table with a warm smile. Miss Mitchell, I just wanted to say that I followed your story in the news, and I want you to know that watching your courage that night inspired me to finally leave an abusive relationship I'd been trapped in for years. Sarah felt tears starting. I'm so glad you're safe now. I am, and I'm applying to law school next fall. I want to help other people the way your foundation helped me find legal support. After he walked away, Marcus shook his head in amazement. You realize that your story has rippled out in ways you'll never fully know. Right people you've never met have made different choices because you chose to speak publicly about what happened to you. Sarah looked down at Maria, who was stirring sleepily in her arms, and thought about the world her daughter would inherit. That's the thing about truth, she said softly. Once you start telling it, it has a life of its own. It spreads and grows and changes things in ways you never expected. Any regrets about that? Sarah thought about the quiet life she might have lived if she had accepted Richard's divorce terms and disappeared quietly. Safe, perhaps, but also small and built on the foundation of other people's lies. No regrets, she said firmly. Only gratitude for getting the chance to become who I was always meant to be. As they walked out into the spring evening, Sarah felt the weight of the year's transformation settling into something like peace. She had lost a marriage that was built on deception, but she had gained a family that was built on truth. She had given up the illusion of security, but she had found the reality of strength. Most importantly, she had learned that love wasn't something that happened to her, but something she chose to build, one honest conversation at a time, one act of courage at a time, one day at a time. The rain had stopped, and the city sparkled with reflected light from windows and street lamps. Sarah adjusted Maria's blanket and walked toward her new life with her brother beside her and her future in her arms. Behind them, the restaurant continued its evening service, serving new stories and new beginnings to people who had no idea that the woman walking away had learned to transform pain into purpose, betrayal into wisdom, and silence into a voice that would help other women find their own courage. Sarah Wheeler. Mitchell Blackstone had come full circle, but the circle was wider now, stronger now, and built on the kind of truth that could withstand any storm.